Hello, everyone, and welcome to this session today. Really happy to have you with us. And we have an unbelievable amount of insight and expertise in this call. So happy to have that. So what are we talking about today? Well, we're going to delve into, as the title may suggest, the kind of 4 principles needed for a good workplace culture and engaged workforce. So those kind of top level things there: building connections, encouraging learning cultures, establishing thriving teams, and preparing our brains for better learning. If that last one sounds really interesting, we're going to delve into that concept. So stick with us. Now, on your screen, our audience, you should see a poll coming up. Now, we're going to talk about that in a couple of minutes. So answer that. Until then, let's go round and everyone just say who we are and introduce ourselves to the audience. Helen, if you want to kick off, you're first on my screen.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Kieran, and thanks everyone for joining today. I'm Helen Marshall. I'm Head of Learning at Thrive. So for those who don't know who Thrive are, we have our own platform, a learning platform, a data service, and our content club, a catalogue of content as well. So nice to be here, and I'll pass over to Anthony.
Brilliant.
Thanks very much. And this is amazing because I can see no one apart from you wonderful folks. So it's all very different. I'm back to being face to face. So now I'm the other side. I'm back to being in meetings. So yeah, hello everyone. My name's Anthony. I'm part of the consulting team here at Bailey & French. And Bailey & French, everything that we do is around humanizing the way that we work to improve kind of organizational agility, create learning cultures that people love and really flourish and thrive in. So yeah, great to join this wonderful group of people today.
Check it over to you, Lauren.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lauren. I am the founder of Learning Pirate. I'm your resident brain nerd, so I'm going to be here to answer all of those burning brain questions. I work as a translator of neuroscience and cognitive neuroscientist and a learning designer. So one of the only learning scientists out there taking everything that we know about the brain, how it works, and building better learning for it. And I will throw over to David.
Thank you very much. My name is David. Thank you for having me. I'm the head of content partnerships at Go1, and at Go1 we are aggregating the world's digital learning content in the spirit of building the best e-learning subscription on the planet. So in the spirit of that, I have the pleasure of bringing together these wonderful people and expert minds in the likes of Thrive and Bailey & French and Learning Pirate. So I'm very happy to be here with you all.
Fantastic, fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for joining us. I'm just waiting for the poll results to come in. So we'll see what people had to say about the poll that we asked them. Okay, so the question that we put out there to the audience, this is the first of 3 that we have for our session today, was on a scale of 1 to 5, how engaged is your workforce, with 5 being exceptionally engaged and 1 being very withdrawn. I think it's a pleasant to see that only 5% put 1. That's kind of a concerning thing if that was any higher. 16% put 2, 47%, and that's by far the largest amount, put 3, just 27% put 4, and just 4% put 5. So we've obviously got a work cut out for us today with this conversation. I guess first and foremost then, my top question is, when we're building strong connections within our organizations, I think it's really easier said than done, as maybe that poll highlights. Especially in an age where kind of the workforce is really physically divided. So how do we do that? How do we facilitate those strong connections? Anthony, maybe you're well placed to kick us off there.
Yeah, and it's a really hot topic, right? And a lot of organizations asking, how do we bring together and connect this hybrid world of work that we're now used to and kind of getting used to, still doing the remote side of things. And also what they're asking actually is, how do we help people to make faster decisions? How do we help people to build trust and connect and collaborate more effectively in meetings so that time is, not wasted having kind of conversation after conversation? How do we move quicker and adapt to the new markets in order to survive as organizations who are needing to adapt very quickly to changing markets? And typically organizations will be focusing on, how do we build trust at senior leadership team level? How do we focus on building kind of psychological safety so that people can learn and adapt and grow and create that environment for working. But what people and the best organizations are really doing, actually, maybe some things to take away, is really having that deeper understanding of others' experiences in life and work, that whole person experience, and having that real emotional intelligence and skill set to be able to delve into each other's more human experiences, what's happening inside and outside of work for you. What strengths, knowledge, experience, values do you bring to the organization, and how are we connecting people to have better conversations around those, and how do we feed those conversations into everyday work practices? Because as we know, we're all still very much time pressured. There's an awful lot of work. A lot of us are very tired. The organizations that we work with are just burning out. So how do we do these things really quickly, really simply, and build really kind of collaborative, connected kind of workplaces and teams? So there's a few things there to take away, but the really important thing is, well, what builds strong kind of connections? How do we build the skills, and how do we deliver those in a really authentic way, so it doesn't feel like a tick box at the beginning of every meeting, for example?
Some really good points there. I'm sure many of our other panelists agree with you. Helen, I wondered if you had any thoughts to add there at all.
Yeah, I think it's quite difficult now. The environment has changed to a more directly hybrid way of working, and that people got used to working at a very fast pace when they went into working from home, but largely depending on your circumstances. And now moving to a hybrid world, there's almost that transition period that Anthony kind of alluded to, that people are working in a very different way. And when you go back into the office, the expectations are maybe still the same, and you're working in a very similar level. And you've got to kind of adjust those relationships and that expectation of how you are when you're in an office environment potentially, and how you are when you're in a virtual environment, and what those behaviors might look like, and how you can build relationships effectively in those two different situations, while still trying to be an authentic individual and bringing yourself, your whole self into that situation as well. And it's difficult.
And we're all kind of profusely nodding away, but Lauren, I could see obviously that kind of really connected with you. I don't know if you want to add anything as well.
Yeah, I certainly do. A lot of the research that myself and my nerds, a bunch of the neuropsychologists and the behavioral scientists were up to over the last 9 months really harmonizes with what Anthony and Helen were just saying. But I think what we also have to recognize is, because of the environmental factors, and I'll take it to the brain because that's what we know, that's what I know, is that, you know, coming into a hybrid environment or coming back into the working environment and having that same social expectation that we had before is definitely something that we have to be very cautionary of. So for those who didn't have that much social interaction, and now we're coming into an environment where all of a sudden the brain is being overstimulated by the senses. So we have sensory stimuli coming at us from people walking by again, or people wanting to stop and interact with us. Even something as simple as those who are really isolated and didn't have any physical contact, something as simple as a handshake now can release so much oxytocin through the brain that the emotional and the physical reaction to that can be really exhausting. So just to be sort of highly aware of the fact that, you know, in the consulting that we're doing right now, we're also asking people in their organizations to recognize that there's going to have to be places within the office environment where if someone needs to take a moment to have a quiet moment to facilitate that, or if they need to down-regulate their emotions a bit, or just kind of get their cognition back online, is to just sort of take into factor that the social component is incredibly important, like Anthony and Helen were saying, but because there is actual chemistry going on in there and firing away, that's making us feel certain things that most of us don't know how to regulate yet. We just want to be really cautious of that.
Yeah, it's so interesting to hear you say that. Obviously, it's not just a mental adjustment. This has such physical ramifications as well. So I guess on that point then, David, I'm going to come to you first with this. What are the keys to creating environments where people feel empowered to learn and develop, where they feel safe and able to do that, especially given this big change that we've seen?
Yeah, as Anthony and Helen and Lauren were just elaborating on, like when we started the this hybrid working, or the lockdown, when we started the pandemic, it was like there's this opportunity for people who weren't so comfortable being in the workplace all the time, to those who had the benefit of working from behind desks, that is, to be a different personality, to bring a different personality to their work. Now I'm finding that actually you've got to do both. You've got to be both that person who's good at the in-person and the events and things like that, and the person who can have that the online personality and the online presence in meetings, and they're very different skill sets. So what I found, and again, guiding light from Anthony over the years as to what's what in human and business psychology, it was, well, focus on your strengths. What is it that you actually enjoy doing? So focus on your strengths, be passionate about what it is that you're learning about and sharing it. And so the journey of who am I is where I've started, and where most people seem to start. So asking the question, who am I? It's easy to say, bring your authentic self to work and create spaces for other people to do the same, but most people aren't really aware of who they are themselves. So we started in that space, and then we socialize the learning we take. So if I take something on imposter syndrome or speaking plain English or something like that, we share it in the team, we can be fallible, and then we'll try to create spaces where people can practice that learning as well. So they can put it into practice in the team environments, and we can watch it fail. It's often me failing at these things, not many other people do, but put it into practice, fail, laugh, try it again the next week. And then that leading by example allows for other people to see it as normal. It's okay to take time out to go and train. And, if you think about work as play and creating that space for people to go and practice things, we find that that has a very good effect, and it brings out the best of other people as well in the team.
Yeah, Anthony, this is definitely kind of your area of expertise. Do you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, I think it's great, that self-awareness piece becoming the first thing that you're doing, because you're so right. It's so easy to have a Zoom version of you, and then you're going back into a face-to-face environment. There's so much emotional kind of anything that's going on in your brain right now, there's loads of that, and the quickest way to kind of get rid of that is to share that with someone, and to go, I'm feeling this, how are you doing? I don't know if anyone's gone into a face-to-face meeting recently, and I did it all of last week, and it was weird. It was the first time in 2 years maybe I was shaking hands and all the rest of it. It's kind of going, are you elbow, not elbow? How are we doing this? And just immediately by asking the question, the whole tension in the room settles, right? We're all experiencing similar things. But I think having that self-awareness, self-confidence, and others awareness, and just having that emotional safety to go, okay, let's just open the floor up. How are we really doing right now? Let's point out the elephant in the room here, and be okay with it, and learn and grow, and adopt that growth mindset into the situation.
Yeah, I love that. It's almost like acknowledging that no one in the room has dealt with this necessarily before. Everyone's kind of in the same boat, aren't they? And that actually takes away some of the them and usness maybe of the situation. Helen, I'm interested whether you've had, these kind of experiences. We were talking before the call about the difficulties with home working, and now this kind of balance between home and work life.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I've got 2 small children, so and like a lot of people, have to balance that challenge on a daily basis. But I think it's about meeting people where they are and in the spaces in which they are as well, and that's very different depending on what type of organization you work in. So I think what we're describing, or what has been described so far, seems to be quite kind of almost office-based environments, whereas you might find yourself in I don't know, on a factory floor, for example, and would those type of conversations be happening in those situations, and how do you support the people in those situations? So I think there's a question around, what do people need in the situations they find themselves in, and how do we support from that perspective? And that might be changing the perception of what learning is, and how people access it, depending on the type of resources they have available, rather than saying this is a mandatory training, for example, and we're going to make you learn something, which is obviously needed in certain situations. Let's take machinery as an example, but it's those kind of softer skills and those kind of leadership skills that Anthony mentioned are much harder to kind of encourage people to think, oh, I actually need to do that, depending on the circumstances in which they find themselves.
Mm-hmm. Oh, fantastic. Well, thank you for your insight there. Lauren, I'm going to pick on your amazing expertise with this next question. So as I mentioned in the intro, we used the term preparing our brains, which I'm sure piqued some interest. I'm wondering, when we're talking about preparing our brains for better learning and this sense of kind of, you know, putting the world of work together again in this new way, what do you think that truly means?
I mean, drink profusely, don't sleep, eat horrible food. No, you know, I think what a lot of us, and it's obnoxious for me to say it at this point, but it's like the first narrative that comes out of my mind is, which is, we just weren't ever given operational manuals of ourselves. There is no the manual, here's your brain manual, like look through that and, work with it. But when we recognize the fact that everything from our thinking to our movement to our feelings, everything is brought down to electrical signals and chemical signals in our brains, it's absolutely mind-blowing. So when we're talking about, how do we prepare our brain for learning? I'm not even going to say prepare your brain for learning. How do we just maintain a optimized state so that we can do everything in our worlds? Because we learn every day, every second, every moment, because if we didn't, we would die. We are functional human beings who are operationally built to learn. So when we're focused learning, now that is something different. So when we want to get into a mode where we are able to absorb knowledge, absorb skills, new habits, look for changes, your entryway to the brain when it comes to learning is focus. And good luck with that. Right? So the latest research is showing us that the brain starts to wander. Previous research has shown us it was 4 minutes. Now we're down to 3. So we start like losing it around 3 minutes. But what we're also dealing with is a bunch of neurochemistry. We're dealing with dopamine, which a lot of people associate with the sort of the chemical of being happy. But really, dopamine is your gateway to motivation and reward. But we don't want to overstimulate that when we're learning, because then we're just focusing on the reward that we're getting and we're not actually encoding a memory. Then you've got these 2 other chemicals, one that helps us to get into the focus mode. It's something called acetylcholine. And another one, which when you harmonize the 2 together, because when we don't know something and we want to go learn it, the brain has a stress response. And the stress response is good in some cases because it moves us into action. It's what's kept us alive, throughout our history. But when the stress response and that one chemical, norepinephrine, adrenaline, essentially overrides the other one, we're taken offline. So your gateway to learning is really learning how to focus. But in order to focus, we need to understand what's going on in our environment, which means we have to then direct our attention to something. So an easy, really simple tip that anybody can do is, before you're going to go to learn, or even if you have something that you really want to work on, whether it's like, I've got to get this presentation done, or I've got to do this speech, or I've got a sales meet, whatever it is literally give your brain 30 seconds to a minute of pure focus on one thing. So we can actually use the visual centers of our brain to help focus the cognitive centers of our brain. And a very easy way to do that is to literally stare at something for 30 seconds before you engage in something else. So some hot brain tips there.
That's amazing. That's really, really interesting. It's such a different way to look at this concept. It makes me really, and I'm sure we all agree here, it makes us think about the way that we view development and learning. The traditional way is just so redundant, it's really interesting. So we put another poll out to the audience. I'm really interested to hear everyone's thoughts on these. So the question was, what is the biggest impediment to a positive workplace culture? The top answers that came through were leadership/team imbalance, cynicism, communication, poor people management, and lack of trust. Those are some big, bold fundamentals there. So I think that actually really leads us perfectly onto my next question. And David, I'm going to have you answer this one first, if you don't mind, which is, how have you fostered positive cultures in your own organizations, how have you fostered cultures where you've got that base right, that then learning and development are, open from that point because you've got that fundamental right?
Yes, I shall paraphrase some of my colleagues here, in that we often think about how do I create a decent learning culture, or how do I go and make a decent learning culture? But as I've learned over the last few years, everyone's got a learning culture. It's just some people have got a better one than others. And the secret between a good one and a really good one is often that the framework is there for people to contribute to it and build that learning culture themselves. So the learning culture should be, coming as a result, as an output of the frameworks and the leadership that you put in place to allow it to happen. In our case, we try to talk about current events, and we allow people to say, hey, this is my experience of this, and talk about how they're feeling. And then from that, we have a very good, with our tool set as well, we're able to deliver learning to anyone wherever they need it. So whether it's in a Slack conversation, a Zoom conversation, a link on WhatsApp, or an e-learning course, an LXP, whatever it might be. So we're able to have conversations, and I get recommendations from my colleagues and across the business. So when I have a recommendation for learning coming from a peer as an output of something that I've shared with them, I'm far more receptive to taking that than the assigned e-learning I got in my inbox to say, hey, you've been assigned Resilience 101. It's like, thanks for recognizing I'm in need of some resilience training, but guess what? The email assignment doesn't quite do it for me. But give it to one of my colleagues to assign to me, or I see my boss has been taking it and recommended it. Yeah, that works.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think we're all in need of a bit of resilience training these days. But Helen, I wonder if you have anything you could add here about your own culture.
Yeah, I think there's two different things here. So there's what we're doing kind of internally at Thrive, and then what we're seeing with all the organizations that we work with. And something that we keep coming back to, both internally, but particularly with the organizations we work with, is the concept of value and the company values, and how we can help people to recognize the type of behaviors that link into those values that ultimately create the culture that you want to see in the organization. And we partner with people to figure out what type of content they might need to encourage certain behavior change. And those conversations lead to some really interesting topics and ideas for engagement in general across the organization. But internally within Thrive, we are very good at, well, we practice what we preach. So we have a platform that is based all around kind of social learning, and exactly what David just mentioned about, if someone recommends something to you, you're far more likely to do it than if you get just a generic email from a system. And that's what our platform is all about. So it's about kind of making sure people come back to things via word of mouth, through endorsements, through who the experts are that are encouraging you to look at certain content. But we're also conscious that we're not the best at doing this internally, and that we do need to invest some time there. So a big focus for us this year is making sure we are where we need to be, compared to where we're telling our clients that they should be as well, and making sure that we're really practicing what we preach, and really embodying our own values too. So I guess there's a two-pronged approach there.
Yeah, love that. Brilliant. I wonder, Anthony, I'm sure you have some interesting things to add from Bailey and French.
Yeah, it's something we talk a lot about, because how can we go out into the world of work and preach this stuff if we don't do it and embody it ourselves? So I guess similarly to both of your organizations, how do you foster a learning culture when you're a learning organization? And what we've really challenged ourselves to do, there's a lot of cognitive overload going on in workplaces right now. There's loads of content, there's loads of things to do, there's loads of things to think about. I don't even know what future jobs might be there in the future, of different roles and digital transformations that are just confusing everyone. Let's strip it right back to what fundamentally human beings need to flourish and thrive. There's work on this from Martin Seligman and Amy Edmondson and loads of other brilliant, beautiful human beings that have put the research in, but stripping out the talent life cycle and putting a more human spin on it. So when we're looking at performance management, for example, what would it look like if it was performance motivation, and using the fundamental research that's out there around respect, clarity, praise, and strengths, and keeping it very basic and very simple, and equipping people to have really easy, simple conversations around those things. And how do you bring that into people's everyday, and keeping it very, very simple and basic, because that's what organizations need right now. So that's what we try and do as much as possible. Get individuals into flow, get teams into flow, get leaders that are role modeling a more human way of working, and help people to, across the organization, have that kind of more human connection together. Easier said than done. You know, we are human beings, and therefore beautifully wonderful at kind of having complexity, and that's great. But how do we keep it as simple as possible, as much as possible?
Brilliant. And of course, Lauren, love to hear what you have to say on this point.
It's not that easy. That complexity is just not that, it's really not that easy. And I think, you know, to Anthony's point about sort of allowing us to be the humans that we are. And there's a lot that everyone just said there between, like, let's talk about resilience. Well, that line of resilience for us moves farther and farther away every day, but it's whether or not we have the coping mechanisms to get to that next line of resilience. And I think that's, you know, where we can turn inwards, which is the level set the expectations of how things are actually happening, you know, as a human being during this experience. So I can't remember if it was Helen. I'm getting you all mixed up with all your wonderful points now, but someone mentioned around time, right? And I will advocate for this. You know, if you're a learning professional, or if you are an SVP, if you're a CEO, or if you're anything, if you are demanding, first of all, don't demand anything of anyone right now, please. Like, that's just not how we want to work or learn. But the process of learning itself, as far as the brain goes, requires time. And it requires sleep. We need sleep, right? So the expectations of sending someone to a training, you know, to do training or a module, or to watch something and say, wonderful, next day, let's go ahead and implement that. Let's see what you've learned. Let's see what you transferred, is completely unrealistic. So if we can understand that there is a very fundamental human process to this that goes with the mind and the brain and the body as a whole operational system, we can move forward a lot better. But if we put time constraints and pressure and everything that works against the operational system first, because the business needs, and I understand that there's a harmonization and a balance between the two, but it's one thing to talk about humanizing the workplace, and it's another thing to act. We don't get into change from the mind, we get in through behaviors and action. I'll stop there.
No, brilliant. Thank you.
Pirate rant.
Well, this is something that we could kind of delve into so much more. So yeah, but really appreciate that. So we actually asked our audience, this is the kind of the last poll that we put out there to our people watching. So thank you very much to the audience for taking part. And what we asked them is, what do you think is the single biggest driver for engagement in your organization? And I'll take it from bottom to top. So professional development had just 11% of the votes. Management had 17% of the votes. Connection to work was at 21%. And then by far the biggest, company culture was in there at 51%. I think that actually kind of ties in with what we've been talking about maybe a little bit here. You know, the way that we kind of communicate, the way that our cultures is set up. So I'm going to ask my kind of last big question here before we move on to some audience questions. And Helen, I'd love for you to kind of lead us on this one. And that is, there are two things here that we have. We have a thriving team and employee development. And I'd like to know where you think those two things intersect. You know, where's the point at which we're driving those connections properly and those two things intersect?
Yeah, so I like to think of a little circle or a triangle, depending on your preference, where you would start with employee engagement, which would then feed into employee development. And because you're engaged, you're more likely to identify opportunities for development and growth, which then in turn would feed into a thriving team, which then encourages employee engagement, and so on and so forth. So I think thriving teams are often based on a set of what I would like to call power skills. So like purpose, direction, flexibility, communication. The list could go on and on. So I think, as well as the kind of practical side of whatever's involved in your kind of day-to-day job, you have a side in which you need to be more human, and to embrace those more difficult to develop characteristics. And I think it's probably also worth pointing out that the strongest teams I've personally worked in find real value in opposition, in holding space for alternative opinions and working with people to figure out what that balance is, or where you should compromise, or where you should meet in the middle. And that investment comes from an individual recognizing that they can develop their skills in a certain area, not just for the good of themselves, but then for the good of a team as well. And I think, just to kind of wrap all that up, that wouldn't happen. And this kind of ties into some of those polls that have just been released, and the results that we've just had in. And it wouldn't happen, I think, without effective line management or the right sort of role modeling from leadership. So many of the organizations we work with are currently in the process of setting up leadership programs or new line manager programs to ensure that the right messaging and behaviors and things like that are embedded on a day-to-day running of the business. So people need to know that their development is a priority, and that their skills want to be retained by a company, and that they're a vital asset in whatever they're doing. So I suppose, to answer your question, one of the core connections, I think, between a thriving team and employee development is line management. And a good line manager would encourage development, and they'd, I suppose, recognize that kind of magic of engagement is really contagious.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. That person, in between kind of the HR top level and the individual is so important, aren't they? The way that they communicate this kind of thing is everything, really, in a sense. Anthony, keen to hear what you think about this question.
Yeah, I don't know who said this, but it wasn't me. I know this, but culture for me comes from the conversations that you experience every day. So Helen, I totally agree. Who are the people that we probably have the most connection and communication with? It's probably our line manager, and then also our team. And when we apply that to the things like the Great Resignation and people wanting to move on, but also the real desire for us to build these kind of capabilities so that we can pick you up and move you across the organization at different times to either just improve your engagement because you're stuck in a role and you might want to move, or you might need to because we're changing direction and this is the direction we need to go in as an organization. The people around you, people in your closest proximity, is what's going to have the greatest impact on your engagement. And it comes back to what I said right back at the beginning: building those stronger connections with who you are as a truly unique individual in your life experiences inside and outside of work is the quickest way that we build that safe kind of environment that enables us to learn and to grow and to thrive. And I think that's the quickest way to then achieve the results and build an organization that feels, and therefore the culture feels like it's positive one, and it's moving in the right direction, and it's got meaning and purpose. So everything that I do every day and I turn up has something I can get stuck into, and that's ultimately, fundamentally, what human beings love to do. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
Brilliant. No, that's great. No, you're completely right. I mean, it does obviously bring us kind of quite full circle on the conversation. But David, I'd love to see if you have any additional thoughts here as well.
Yeah, I guess it's twofold. I'll follow on the theme there. The one is being able to encouraging these employee-led groups, so encouraging people within the organization to create their sub-communities and their subcultures, their own tribes, because they'll attract other people from like-minded groups. And whether that be tackling things from neurodiversity in the workplace and communities that support other people and indeed their family members and things like that, all the way through to the book club and the Go One Dogs channel, where anyone who's got a dog likes to post the pictures on there. For me, it's therapy. I love it. So there's that, and then there's encouraging, just giving the tool set. So it's literally just the framework so that people can go and switch on the tool and create their community, and then share their learning and whatever else it might be. But on top of all of that, it's simply learning how to work with others. And it's a really, really difficult thing, because we say like, start with yourself, understand yourself, then you can understand how others might think. But the tools and the actually working together in harmony with other people, and to Helen's point, when you identify what good teams look like, it's not necessarily that you've got superstars across the team, it's that they work in harmony together and they give each other space to work to their strengths. So for me, that's the main one I try to remember every day.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic. And of course, Lauren, would love to hear your thoughts here as well.
I mean, what I just got out of that is that every organization needs to have a dog Slack channel.
I think we all agree with that. Yeah.
I don't know how anyone does anything at Go One with that to look like. I mean, like everyone just said, it's, I'll put the scientific spin on it here, which is, we have to recognize that even when we go back into these environments and building back our communities, and when we're hybrid, there's a lot that we need to take into consideration. And I think the best thing that we can do is have a higher awareness and recognize that the person and your colleague and your friend and all of those that you haven't seen for maybe 2 years might not be the same behavior or person that's showing up in the same place in the same way, and vice versa. So to rebuild a community and to rebuild the engagement and the culture is to really understand and to be empathetic and sympathetic to those experiences that we all had. Because, I think there was I can't remember who said it, but they're like, we might have all been in the same storm, but we were all in different boats. Mm-hmm. I was in a canoe because I'm Canadian, but like maybe Anthony was in a yacht. I wasn't. But yeah, just to be a little bit more consciously aware of that, the fact that we know with certainty because of the research and because people we talk to each other, our behaviors did change over this. And so just be mindful of that.
That's a fantastic phrase. I've heard people say that a few times recently, and it's so poignant. The same storm but different boats is the ideal way, I think, to look at this. So I'm gonna we've been talking, it's been so great, but I'm so mindful of the time kind of slipping away underneath us. So I'm going to dive into a couple of audience questions. Helen, I think that you're a really well-placed person to answer this. Someone said that obviously e-learning is something that so many companies use to build on their workplace cultures and engage their workforces and develop people. But how do we do that effectively, given how much everything's changed? Really interested to hear what you think about this.
Yeah, I think it comes down to delivery a lot of the time. So I do understand that sometimes e-learning has to be used from a compliance perspective, and there are kind of regulatory requirements in that regard. But if we're thinking about how we can encourage people to think about learning differently, then perhaps you could think about it more like from a comms or a marketing perspective in terms of the delivery of that information. So it doesn't have to just be e-learning. That isn't the be all, or definitely not the be all and end all of digital learning or digital resources. So what else can you use to kind of create a journey for someone from what are you trying to get them to achieve from moving them from A to B, and what do they need along the way? Will an e-learning course really plug the gap that you're looking for? Are people going to get the right information out of it? I think a lot of the time the answer to that is probably no. So what else can you do to encourage different resources or different approaches to whatever it is that you're trying to do with that piece of e-learning? And that could be user-generated content, for example. You could look to your staff to fill gaps, to create content for you. It's just thinking a little bit differently about what it is that you're trying to do, and figuring out exactly what it is you're trying to do as well. I think there's a place and a time for modules. I think they need to be short and snappy. They need to be bite-sized. And that's, Lauren can maybe speak more about that, kind of how learning could be spaced or sized or chunked in certain ways to encourage retention. But yeah, I think you maybe think a bit more holistically about that whole experience and how you're moving people from one place to another.
Mm-hmm. Fantastic, thanks for that. I think you're completely right, Helen. Lauren, I'm sure you have some really good insight here from your brain wizardry position.
Wow, pirate and a wizard. My titles just keep getting better. So anyone who's out there who is responsible for the design of learning, the development of learning, and the implementation of learning, which I'm assuming is most of the audience here, fundamentals here is that memories just don't happen. Episodic memories, yeah, those can happen pretty quickly and get stored in your long-term memory system. But when we're looking to encode and embed, because we got to remember, a memory is a network in your brain that needs to be practiced and rehearsed for it to be stimulated again to act. Is the only way that we get learning into a memory, which then becomes a transferable behavior. Memory consolidates when we sleep, though. So neuroplasticity, as most people know, is your brain's ability to change, but neuroplasticity is triggered by the learning experience, but it's solidified overnight in the consolidation of memory. So that spaced time is incredibly important. So for my designers out there who are using spaced repetition, it's not about just putting it in that one module, then to the next. You actually need time variables over the course of days so that the brain can encode the memory itself. So spacing is really important when we're wanting people to learn something and transfer it effectively.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for the insight there. I'm going to move on to another question here because we've had another great one in. And Anthony, I'm going to leave with you, and then David, cue you up. You have a bit more time than Anthony to consider this question. Someone's asked, what are the best practices to meet the differing wants and needs of a highly multi-generational workforce? This is something that we have heard so much about recently. So Anthony, fire away. What do you think?
Yes, on behalf of all generations and knowledge of all generations across time. Wow, it is something that we're hearing an awful lot about. And I think any conversation that I've ever had about it at senior leadership team and, preparing our organizations for increasing generation gaps, people are increasingly not going to university. So then you're actually speeding up the rate at which people are coming into organizations. Curiosity and other awareness and that connection that I've just spoken about. We find out what you have in common, because actually when you look at generational gaps, are they generational gaps or is it just time lapse and experience? And it's, we've heard about kind of the entitlement of younger generations and thinking that they've got the knowledge and answers quicker and they know better. Sometimes they might do because they've got the world of internet and all the rest of it that they've grown up with. Other side, you've got life experience. And I guess it's just having that curiosity and that culture of curiosity and continued learning and asking questions rather than thinking that you have the answers, because that's why we've got such polarized, I've been told by Google that I've got these all opinions, and that's why I keep getting the same information that just polarizes my opinion further. Let's create and create a space in our organizations to challenge some of that thinking openly and encourage those conversations with a curious mindset, I'd say.
Brilliant and fantastic. Thank you, David. We've got about 2 minutes left, so you're going to need to fire through this one. I'm sorry to put you on the spot here.
And I appreciate the time warning. Thank you. That was an excellent question. We're not going to have all of the answers to all of the different needs of these different generations in the workplace. And it's not just different generations. There's diversity coming in there. There's cultures, there's histories, there's backgrounds, there's ability to process information. There's people that just do not want. If we think about it, let's be honest with ourselves, think forward 5 years from now. How many of us think that we're going to be going through e-learning courses like this with a keyboard in front of us and a screen? That's a pretty sad future if that's where e-learning is at 5 years from now. But maybe a lot of it does need to be that way. So the advice is simply to say you're not going to have all of the answers for all of the different types of learners that you have, but there are solutions out there that engage learners with all the different modalities, and whether that's an audio only thing. We've got courses now that you can do the actual course or just take the audio version. We've got PDFs, you've got content from the likes of Thrive that's topical. So, the lockdowns were announced and we had a PDF out from Thrive saying, hey, before you leave the office, this is a toolkit. So you remember all of your chargers and your screen adapters and think about these things because you might not be able to go back. And so partnering with someone who's going to give you the rich learning library full of stuff that's important for career development, but also things they can take out of the workplace. So when you take a conversation on how to have the art of listening, these are things that you take out of the workplace and back into your friends and family. And that's where you can have an impact outside of the work as well. And when you see that learning take place, it's inspiring. So it keeps you, it feeds that hunger in the organization to keep learning. So
fantastic.
And
well, yeah,
we're going to share a playlist as well that will give everyone a little sample of what that learning can look like too.
Excellent, excellent. Thank you so much for that. Well, thank you for everyone. I'm so sorry we've run out of time because it's been an absolutely fascinating conversation. So thanks so much, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.